Welcome to the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce's inaugural State of LA Business, a new Los Angeles, our post-pandemic economy. To kick us off, please join me in welcoming Vice President of Supply Management and Support Services for Southern California Gas Company and 2020 LA Area Chamber of Commerce Board Chair, Danita Willoughby.
Good morning and welcome to our first State of LA Business. I am excited to be here with you today, and I hope you are ready for a day filled with great conversations with business, policy, and education leaders from across our region. To say that 2020 has been a challenging year filled with twists and turns would be an understatement of the decade. The pandemic has had a detrimental effect on our region's economy. Los Angeles has seen 15,000 permanent business closures and an unemployment rate of 16%. From our largest employers to our smallest of businesses, the impact has been felt. To face these challenges, businesses have had to shift their business models, pivot to digital operations, but they've shown incredible innovation and resiliency. During our conference today, we'll explore our theme, a new Los Angeles, our post-pandemic economy. You will hear from leaders from across various sectors that are ready to roll up their sleeves, collaborate, and develop a plan for how we get our region on a path to recovery. This is just one example of how the Chamber is working with our community to build a thriving region for all. Now, before we get started with today's programming, I would like to thank our sponsors. Without their generous support, this event would not be possible.
Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Amazon. Our gold sponsors, Edelman, Facebook, HNTB. Our silver sponsors, AT&T, Delta Airlines, Los Angeles Times, Ring, Southern California Edison, Wells Fargo. Our bronze sponsors, Coca-Cola, Valero, WSP.
Now, for a word from our presenting sponsor, Amazon, please join me in welcoming Layla Ruhi, President of Ring.
Good morning to the LA Chamber, to our elected officials, and to my fellow Angelenos. I'm Layla Ruhi, President of Ring. Amazon and Ring are thrilled to be presenting sponsors of today's event. At Ring, our mission is to help make neighborhoods safer. 2020 has presented all of us with a unique set of challenges, but never has there been a time where we have felt more connected to our neighbors. Over the last 6 months, we have seen time and time again, neighbors stepping up for neighbors, and Angeleno stepping up for Angeleno. Like Cade, who helps to safely deliver groceries and visit his elderly grandfather in Santa Clarita Valley.
Good morning, Pa.
Hey.
I'm at the store right now grabbing stuff for you guys, and then I'll drop it off, okay?
Okay, Kate.
Love you.
Love you too.
We are confident that through cross-sector collaboration, we will continue to move our city forward. Ring and its mission to make neighborhoods safer was born in a backyard in Los Angeles, and we are proud to still call Los Angeles our home. We are committed to making Los Angeles and the broader community a better place every day. We are thrilled to be here today among our region's leaders to discuss our city's post-pandemic economy. Together, especially through the conversations taking place today, and with the help of the LA Chamber, I'm confident that we will continue making our neighborhoods safer, better places to live and work for many generations to come.
Thank you, Layla. We are incredibly proud to have you and Amazon with us today, and as a valued member of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. With that, we are ready to dive into our first session of the day, the next chapter for LA's regional economy. To help get us started, please join me in welcoming our session sponsor, Facebook.
Hi everyone, my name is Diana Dukas and I manage Facebook's economic impact efforts. We're thrilled to continue partnering with the LA Area Chamber of Commerce as we all seek to guide and support small businesses our business community during these unprecedented times. This chamber, like so many across the country, have been our go-to experts on how we all help maintain our communities and keep small businesses afloat. Thank you so much to Maria and the entire chamber team for all of your hard work. We are honored to serve as a sponsor for today's session, the next chapter for LA's regional economy. At Facebook, our mission is to build products and services that connect our global communities, and that starts with our local markets. As you all know, small businesses are the heartbeat of our communities, and as you all know, they are struggling to survive these very uncertain times. We have hundreds of employees who work and live in the LA area. We consider ourselves an LA business. Thank you so much for having us. This pandemic isn't just a health crisis, it is an economic crisis, and it's hitting small businesses particularly hard. I continue to be so inspired by the way people are jumping in and are eager to help our communities, and Facebook wants to continue to help. That's why we've introduced several new products and features to support small businesses. We committed $1.5 million in COVID grants to support small businesses during this time. And we've also created a business resource hub, both on Instagram and Facebook, to provide small businesses the tips and tools and trainings that they need to help get through this crisis. It is so important for us all to continue building tools that support small businesses, and we want to make that easier for you to support them as well. This recovery is long. It is going to be a long journey, but we are all in this together. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the session, and I hope you're all well. Take care.
Now, I'd like to introduce Ernst & Young's managing partner for Greater Los Angeles, leading a team of over 2,200 professionals who serve more than 1,000 clients in all of Los Angeles' key industries, Patrick Neiman.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be with you today as leaders in LA to discuss the current and future state of LA business. For the past 7 months, we have all felt the brutal and very real impact of COVID-19. While it is imperative that we acknowledge the impact and continued risk of this very real pandemic, it is equally important to talk about the future of our region. And I'm thankful that the LA Area Chamber of Commerce has brought us together for this purpose. Today is a day to focus on the recovery of Los Angeles and our broader region. Today is a day to consider a path forward. Today is a day to think about what we can become. As I reflect on the future of LA business, I think it's important to remember our rich history and strong legacy. For instance, my firm, Ernst & Young, is celebrating its 100th year in Los Angeles. Many companies, universities, and other institutions have been in LA even longer than that. As we celebrate our milestone, I've often thought back to those few Ernst & Young partners who were sent west to be a part of a growing business community and seize the opportunity that LA presented. Going even further back, it's interesting to reflect upon the founding of our LA Area Chamber of Commerce in October 1888, 132 years ago this week. You may not know that our chamber's founding came about as the result of a downturn in the local economy. You see, LA's population was decreasing rapidly as 1,000 people each month were leaving town. LA had gone from 70,000 residents to 50,000 in just a few years. There was a sudden realization of the need to dismiss doubts and reinvigorate the courage of the citizens. Yes, 132 years ago, a small group of business leaders came together to quickly reverse a very concerning trend. At the same time, they came together to plot a course for our region's long-term success. I think we have the same opportunity starting today to address the short term as we plan for the long term. I believe that our chamber's founders would be quite fulfilled to know that their legacy continues to carry on 132 years later with this gathering here today. convened by the organization they started. But even more, they would be in awe to see what LA has become. A diverse center of commerce comprised of virtually every sector that last year represented GDP of roughly $1 trillion, nearly 5% of our country's output. A center of higher education with more than 100 colleges and universities developing talent and future leaders. A region where families have access to the most advanced health and medical care in the world. And a community with faith-based and other nonprofit organizations bringing together the public and private sectors to accomplish immeasurable good and look out for the most vulnerable amongst us. That growth, opportunity, and charitable spirit comes from LA. It represents LA. It is LA. We need a plan to live and work through the pandemic. I think that our business community is ready for this and to do what is necessary to remain safe and healthy in the workplace. We are rightly focused on the serious health risks posed by COVID-19, but at the same time, we need LA business to reemerge stronger than ever with a path forward for not just months to come, but decades to come. Why is this important? When we talk about business, some reduce this to being about profits for a small group, growing the top and bottom lines. There's nothing wrong with profits for those who take risks and create jobs, but there is so much more at stake. A strong LA business community can restore jobs for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and ensure workers' abilities to support their families. These are mothers and fathers, many with young children. This is about turning around an eroding tax base that will decrease funding for first responders, child and family services, the homeless, and many other services for our region's most vulnerable. Think about the charities and other nonprofit organizations that won't have the funding to meet their missions. Think about the impact on our health facilities and educational institutions. In the end, these agencies and institutions are pillars in our society, and all of them are inextricably linked to the business community. So in a very real way, the future of our region depends on the future of our business community. Our society cannot thrive without it. With sound policies, we can get our region healthy again, economically and socially. Earlier, I talked about the history of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. I think we should all find inspiration and direction in what a small group of business leaders were able to accomplish. But we can also examine more recent history to recall what is possible. One example, at the beginning of 2020, unemployment in LA County was at its lowest point in more than 40 years. In a matter of 7 months, COVID-19 has caused the loss of nearly 1 million jobs. We have to dig out of this. We must move forward, and we must find a way to live and work through a pandemic rather than waiting for it to go away. It will take business, labor, educational institutions, the nonprofit community, and government all working together, including our elected city, county, and state officials. Now is the time that we should all be leaning in, but we need to be leaning in the same direction. And our goal shouldn't just be to mitigate the damage of or recovering after COVID-19. Rather, we should aspire to work together to be stronger than ever and to become resilient and competitive for decades to come. We need to have honest discussions and consider real solutions to address our challenges, whether they have been caused by COVID-19 or whether they existed before this pandemic. This is the time to think big and consider how strong LA can be and should be. And compared to 1888, think of the resources we have. With the right policies, decisions, and strategy, there is no region that should thrive more than Los Angeles. In closing, I want to once again thank the Chamber for convening us today, and also to express my sincere thanks to each of you for your time and even more for caring so much about Los Angeles and helping to build a plan for our future. I hope you find today productive, and I wish you and your loved ones the very best in these uncertain times. Thank you.
I'm excited to introduce our panel discussion. It's a question that's on the minds of business leaders, not only in our region, but throughout the country. Please join me for a fireside chat discussing the next chapter for LA's regional economy. Join me in welcoming our panelists for this morning's session on LA's regional economy. First, we have Monica Bankin. Monica is the Children's and Social Services Deputy and the Economic and Workforce Development Deputy for Los Angeles County Supervisor Catherine Barger, advising on issues related to foster youth, education, social services, workforce development, economic development, community services, and aging. Next, we have Geoff Garrett, who is a distinguished international political economist and LinkedIn influencer. Geoff joined USC as Dean of the Marshall School of Business in July and recently finished his first 100 days as Dean of the Marshall School, where he joined us from the same role as Dean at the Wharton School in Pennsylvania. Finally, let me introduce Scott J. Olmsted, the group head for the technology group within Global Commercial Banking for Bank of America. Scott leads a team that advises emerging growth to public companies in the technology industry across multiple segments of their business. So welcome to each of you, and I'm going to start with a question for Monica. Monica, Los Angeles has some of the highest numbers of business closures in the country. Can you speak to the magnitude and impact of these closures to our region's economy? And how has the county been supporting our businesses and workforce during the pandemic?
Thanks, Pat. Definitely LA County has seen a larger magnitude and impact of business closures. And that's because of the types of businesses we have here. And I think they would be no surprise to most people. Arts, entertainment, recreation, tourism, food services. We're very diversified in a lot of those things. But it also means that when we had those types of closures, and many of them are still closed, especially including tourism-related industries like hotels, et cetera, recreation, museums, indoor museums, and pretty much anything related to filming that was closed for quite some time. It impacted us greatly. Right now, we're around a 20% unemployment, and that's based on numbers from the State Economic Development Department. But what we found is that those numbers could be a little off in some ways, and I think my labor economist friends would agree. The numbers are a little old. We get them about a month out. And also we believe that there's possibly, there are undercounting gig workers, which we have a lot of here in LA. Also, we found out most recently that the fraud that we've all seen in the news, when EDD started imposing new fraud mechanisms on applications, they actually had a decrease of 82% of applications each week due to fraud. So that's why our magnitude and impact is much greater because of the types of businesses that we have. And that also reflects the types of people that work in those jobs. And so what we're seeing is an impact in groups that are seeing a higher impact. And that includes women, young workers between the ages of 16 to 24, Black, Asians, and Hispanic, those with less educational attainment. Most unemployed are having a high school bachelor or degree or less. And how has the county supported businesses and workers at this time? Well, we've had the CARES Act dollars, and that's been about $1.2 billion that we've received from the federal government. Those issues and those things have gone to health impacts in the county, including COVID testing, housing, rental relief, foreclosure support, but also expanded funding for business loans and grants for both nonprofits, arts nonprofits, small businesses, micro entrepreneurs. So just kind of a lot of people that have been seeing particular impacts and the types of groups that would be unable to get PPP loans. So we're working to try to expand and meet the state stringent requirements so we can move out of the less restrictive into the most out of the most restrictive tier and into a less restrictive tier. So those are some of the things we are trying to do, and we're going to keep up the good work.
Thanks, Monica, to you and all your colleagues at the county, and know how hard you're working on our behalf. Scott, you and your colleagues at Bank of America see a lot. What impact have you seen amongst your business banking clients, big and small, in the LA region? And what has Bank of America done to support businesses through this pandemic?
Thanks, Pat. Monica said it very well in terms of the impact. It's been significant to companies in the LA area. The types of industries that make up the LA economy is very much around group gatherings or venues or inside, theaters. And so with the limitations on that, it was a significant hit to a lot of companies' revenue streams. Unanticipated as well. That was one of the other things that was really impactful to these companies is within a matter of weeks, they went to having no revenue. From hearing about the pandemic and making it to the US to when they were shutting down, they were not prepared for this. And so it was something that they tried to jump on as quickly as possible. But the first thing was to get the health of their employees and to get them safe, and then to come back and focus on the business. So a lot of the work that the bank has been doing within the business community revolves around, in that first part, was really getting these companies the amount of liquidity that they needed in order to be sustainable during this time period. So for the larger companies, we were able to go to the capital markets and help them raise money and get them out, multiple years, so that they had the ability to be, around and keeping their employees that they could employed, here for a while to be able to work out of it. For the small and medium-sized businesses, we were a major part of the PPP program. Within a couple of weeks, we had set everything up. Within the LA County, we helped 32,000 plus companies receive over $2 billion worth of PPP funding to help sustain their business. And of note is that 80% of those businesses that we helped get that money had 10 employees or less. So LA is made up of a lot of small businesses, and those are the ones that, as Monica said, they were impacted probably the most in the speed in terms of which happened, because their liquidity amount is not as much as some of the other bigger corporations. So we are consistently trying to work with them to help out. On the other front is a lot of these employees either had reduced pay or maybe lost their pay completely. So through our customer assistance program, nationally, we have 1.8 million payment deferrals, whether that's through credit card, auto, mortgage, home equity line, or even some small business lending outside of what money came from PPP. So we've really been trying to prop up and keep these businesses running as much as they possibly can in a very difficult environment, and liquidity is a way that they can do that. Another way that we've been helping out is through our foundation. We've made $4 million worth of grants to some of the micro lenders. Monica mentioned that as well. We've been helping to on that front. Also, we've been helping on the healthcare front. So we made a donation to Ultimate Foundation, which has been helping out some of the discrepancies in terms of healthcare available to different parts of the Los Angeles population, to make sure that some of our underserved communities get the healthcare that they need, because a lot of them are frontline workers. We were an essential business. We are an essential business. So we stayed open the whole time. We had financial centers open from the beginning all the way currently now, because banking needs to happen for a lot of these small businesses to continue to run. So we were providing masks for a number of people. We made $1 million commitment to masks within the LA community. So we are trying to soften the blow, so to speak, of what's happening within the economy and get everybody on a footing that they can be ready to, which we're starting to see now, to build again, to start to figure out how they're going to make their business be a little different, to deal with this, because it is going to be around for a long time, and we want to be there to support the LA community.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks to Bank of America. You and the other banks have really been a big part of the solution in helping so many companies, so many of those family businesses, entrepreneurs that you talked about through this tough time. Geoff, Marshall's a very global institution. You have a very global background. This is a global health and economic crisis like perhaps we've never seen before. Can you speak to the current state of internal trade and our global economy and its impact on our regional economy?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it is appropriate that we've focused thus far on small and medium-sized enterprises because they clearly are the core of the LA economy. But the other thing that's distinctive about LA, obviously, is that it's the gateway to the Asia Pacific, with nearly half of goods entering the US entering through the ports of LA and Long Beach. When I think on many dimensions, the pandemic is accelerating trends that were already there. And I think that's true with respect to trade, and especially with respect to the US-China economic relations. So everyone knows that we're talking now about less reliance on China for production and final assembly. There's an imperative to shorten supply chains, and we're also talking about, instead of offshoring jobs, talking about reshoring jobs. Let me just focus on US-China for a second. One thing that I don't think has received much attention in the press, or as much attention as it should have, is that the US-China trade deficit has actually come down a lot since 2016, by more than $100 billion. But the reason for that isn't more US exports to China, it's fewer US imports from China. So if I think about the future and what it means for LA with respect to US-China in particular, I do think there are export opportunities for LA-based industries into the Chinese economy, and above all, the creative economy, I think, is a great opportunity. And I don't think the creative economy will be subject to the same kind of technology come national security restrictions that are affecting other parts of exports to China. But maybe more important is the fact that the diversification of American supply chains away from China is going to empower a lot of other economies around the world. So right now we're seeing Vietnam, for example, becoming a new place where American firms want to do final assembly and manufacturing instead of southern China. But looking forward, I think the big opportunity is Mexico. Mexico has a low-cost base, and it doesn't have any of the trade restrictions, obviously, that now apply with respect to China. We have lots of concerns, obviously, about physical infrastructure and about governance in Mexico. But the proximity of Mexico to Southern California is just an extraordinary opportunity. So I think in a lot of businesses, obviously beginning with logistics, Mexico is going to become an increasingly important part of the regional economy in the years ahead. That trend was already there, but I think it's absolutely being accelerated by the pandemic, but more importantly by the rebasing of US-China relations.
Really interesting, Geoff, and I appreciate that perspective. Scott, I'm going to come back to you. And once again, you and your colleagues at Bank of America touch businesses from across the region and from virtually all sectors and industries. How have the bank and businesses been adapting during the COVID-19 pandemic? And also, how can businesses share best practices to enhance regional collaboration?
Sure, thanks, Pat. It was mentioned in prior conversations around innovation. When you have a situation where you're in almost survival mode, that's when you really start to realize I've got to look at my business through a different lens. What was working before maybe isn't working again right now, and so I need to innovate. I need to change. I need to look at how am I going to make my business be different so that I can accommodate the situation that I'm in right now. And so what happened was a lot of things that were kind of in flight, I would call it, for a lot of businesses became front and center. And so it is now an accelerated pace for a lot of the innovation that companies were wanting to put out there, or ones that were slow to adopt are now saying I have to, because if I don't, I'm not going to be able to, survive in this go forward economy. So what we're seeing a lot of companies doing, there's a lot around technology. I spend a lot of time in this space. We see a number of companies who are adapting, different types of technologies, mainly around payments. When you think about the large, business to consumer environment that the LA economy is in, having those payments, not be in the form of cash. Early on in the whole pandemic, nobody wanted to touch anything. So giving cash was not something that was really going to be, a good use for different companies to use as a currency. And in fact, there was a situation at the very beginning where coins were in shortage because nobody was, necessarily using cash, but the ones that were, they couldn't get necessarily change because it was sitting in, different companies, different people's homes, and it wasn't circulating the same way that happened. So what you're starting to see is more companies adopting things like Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or Zelle or any of the payment systems where it's done through a device that most people have and they carry with them all the time, which is your phone. We're seeing companies that are moving their supply chains, around different ways, which Jeffrey just talked about. Maybe not all coming from Asia Pacific, but from other areas that are much closer and much more reliable for them to be able to get their services and their products that they need. It is really looking into how can I be the most efficient with what I'm doing so that when I'm delivering the product that I am, it's a great client experience and it's just different than what I was doing before. So think a lot of the food service industry where they a lot of them have become mostly takeout versus dine in, which is a very different business model to run, but they had to adapt to that in order to survive. And now they're thinking about the client experience. How do I make that client experience better? Just take that across multiple different industries. That's the phase I feel as we're talking to different businesses of how can they be different during this pandemic to still have that same great client experience they did pre-pandemic, but it's going to adhere to all the safety situation that we have to deal with and the different environment we had to deal with. And it's really that thought process and that innovation. And much like you started with in your opening salvo, and there's been different types of situations that the economy has gone through that have been significant. One of being the 1918 flu, it changed the way people did business going forward. And we're in another one of those times, and people just need to be looking at their businesses a little differently. There's a lot of resources out there to help think about that and have a different delivery in terms of how they provide that business. The way to share that too is trade groups. It's the conventions that typically happen in person. They'll be online for a while, but they will come back again at some point in time to be in person. It's sharing best ideas. It's things such as this, the LA Chamber, organizations that have multiple people from different disciplines talking about what they're doing, because a lot of this is not necessarily industry specific. It's more business model enhancement that they can utilize within their own industry to be able to deliver for their clients and in a way that's safe for everybody that's out there. So it's been a interesting kind of pivot away from really the, oh my goodness, what's happening to my company, to I've stabilized it now. Now how do I get back into a mode where I'm getting back to the business that I would before? And it will take a long time to get there. This is not going to be a quick recovery, most likely, but they're getting the right steps to make things a little easier for their clients to do business with them and for them to do business with their clients. And it's starting to feel a little bit more regular, more business as usual. And that's like to see that now. It's just about making sure we get enough people back to work and the economy back on stable footing so that we can have these companies really growing and not just being stabilized.
Thanks, Scott. Regular sounds really, really good for so many of us right now. So, Monica, I'm going to come back to you. You mentioned a few moments ago about the impact on different constituencies around LA. How's the county addressing the disproportionate health and economic impacts faced by communities of color during the pandemic, minority-owned businesses, for instance?
Definitely, and thanks, Pat. Yeah, I wanted to mention who is impacted early on, so it helps us kind of reset and focus on what the intentions are. I would say a few years ago, when I was at RAND, my colleagues did a really great research project on kind of the workforce of California's tourism industries. And it was exactly what we said. It was young people entering a job for the first time, or maybe someone older, but entering the workforce at their first time as an entry-level job, helping at a theme park or answering the phones at a hotel or something. But those experiences are really important over the long term. And so when we don't have those now, and there really isn't another skill to push back on, that's the problem and how we want to be moving towards innovation. I think we all saw this in probably the late 90s, early 2000s with the Japanese economy as well, that it was either, innovate or die, and changing in business models. In terms of how are we helping our minority in business operations here in Los Angeles, the county's really been trying to focus efforts on health in those regions, as well as supports and business supports for low-income communities in highly impacted regions. And part of that is the county of Los Angeles really does want to see those areas focus. Another piece of that has come up recently, which you may have seen in the news, is the state has created a health equity score for communities that you can't move out of different tiers within the coronavirus closure structure unless you're addressing health equity issues. So the county has partnered with a fair number of our community organizations to really share information with adults, with seniors, with English language learners in those regions, and providing assistance and support so that we do see that the health of those communities does increase.
Thank you, Monica. Geoff, I have a question for you. I mentioned earlier this morning 100 plus universities, colleges around Los Angeles. I talked about my firm celebrating its 100th anniversary. Your institution, the Marshall School, is also celebrating its 100th year here in LA. USC been around much longer than that. So I'm interested in how are universities partnering with the county and the private sector to aid pandemic relief efforts? And what can higher education do to help facilitate a successful and inclusive economic recovery?
Fantastic questions. Let me just start with the fact that for higher education, the pandemic has actually been a lesson in how US federalism operates. Higher education has been affected by a lot of policies coming out of Washington in the pandemic, in particular the visa status of international students. Decisions that Governor Newsom makes make a big difference for us. So do those of Mayor Eric Garcetti. But the proximate one actually for us is the LA County Health Department, which has to allow or disallow certain activities for the university. And at the moment, USC is in a remote semester for all of our students because LA County has said that the only thing we can do on campus is really essential work, beginning with healthcare provision, but not quite limited to that. I think everyone should remember with respect to USC that USC is the largest private sector employer in Los Angeles. And I think it's really been a standout feature of President Carol Folt's first year as president of USC that she's really said our people are our greatest asset, and the university has held the line on staffing and employment during the pandemic in ways that I think are very admirable. Thinking about the Marshall School, business schools are all about two-way engagement with the business community. It's key to everything that we do. It's how we recruit students, it's how we place students, and we want to provide thought leadership about the future of business. When I think about the future of higher education, again, I think the pandemic is accelerating trends that were already there. And the biggest one concerns affordability and access. So the value of higher education to lifetime earnings remains really clear. But obviously costs have been rising faster than the consumer price index now for a couple of decades. I think what USC has done with respect to affordability and access has been really admirable. The university now provides free tuition for any family with family income under $80,000 a year. USC as a private university is really a large recipient and benefits enormously from transfer students from community colleges. I think about 750 new community college students transfer to USC undergraduate every year. And 20% of all USC undergraduates now are first generation students. That is the first person in their family to go to college. If I focus in just for a second on business education, degrees are foundational. The skills that people learn in bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, MBAs are foundational. And we're committed certainly to making them more available, both on campus, but also leveraging technology. USC and Marshall have been leaders in online degrees for almost a decade now. But I think the big trend is going to be lifelong learning for everyone. So I hope that the Marshall School can be there for people as they change careers, as they need to acquire new skills for jobs that don't even exist yet. So I do think lifelong learning as well as degrees is going to be the 1-2 punch for business schools. What kind of skills are people going to need? I think we're seeing right now a really interesting bifurcation where an emphasis on facility with technology, data analytics, is obviously now put a premium on in so many sectors. But equally important, and as AI becomes a more dominant feature of the economy, I think interpersonal skills and the value of being human is going to increase in the business world. So I think that the priority for Marshall is going to be that 1-2 punch, 2 1-2 punches. First, degrees are foundational, but lifelong learning for everyone. And then second, yes, technical skills are really important, but equally so are interpersonal skills.
Wonderful input, Geoff, and much appreciated. Monica, today we've gathered people from the private sector, people from government, clearly a cross section of our greater LA community. How important are public-private partnerships in addressing the challenges faced by businesses and communities during the pandemic, and what has worked and what will be critical as we move forward, in your view?
Well, I would say public-private partnerships, it used to be called PPP before this year's PPP. And I would say for the county, I was using that term a long time, and all of a sudden it became, the paycheck protection, and it's like, what? It used to be public-private partnerships. I would say it's always valuable. We, especially at the county, found it very valuable because there are certain things that, and I think in a good way, we don't want government to have everything and have its lever on everything. That just isn't something that I think is most useful, especially when there's other people that have talents and skills, et cetera. So in terms of testing for COVID, county partnered early on with a fair number of our pharmaceutical companies to start looking at testing and locations. You'll even see in the vote centers now, a lot of those locations are private locations like the Pantages or the Forum, et cetera, that have kind of stepped up and helped us. And I've worked a lot with community groups that have been helping with food distribution in their communities, creating food pantries, even colleges that have opened up their food pantries that used to be for some of their needy students that have expanded that to the community at large. I know that did happen at Pasadena Community College. And what we also found, I would say, for those public-private partnerships is for those businesses that have been partners or vendors to the county. And I think that's something I would really want to stress for those watching today, is the importance of kind of taking the time early on to apply through a very laborious process of becoming a county vendor. Even restaurants or caterers that had worked at the county before when we had expanded the Great Plates Initiative, which is food service for seniors. Those companies that were already in the system, we could kind of work really quickly and get them a contract to help out and deliver food to needy seniors who were homebound that used to be able to go to senior centers. And those senior centers closed because of the COVID closures. So to me, I think those are some really great examples of public-private partnerships. And one, Pat, that we're thankful for your leadership on was the LA County Economic Resiliency Task Force. Supervisor Barger really did want to make sure that we were hearing from communities and from business sectors themselves, because they have the most expertise in their area, and they will be the ones to be able to help us and help identify how we can open safely when we open up businesses. And I think that's been very valuable, is to have that conversation. And I think we've done a really good job here in LA County at being able to listen and hear and have a dialogue to be able to have things that are safe and open. And as we're moving along with this process of openings, to be able to work with our businesses, and restaurants were a great example of restaurants saying, hey, these certain things work for us. These other things, we cannot make any money if you go down that road. So, we can't be open at 10% capacity. It's just easier to go bankrupt. And that's not what we wanted to see. So that was really helpful and valuable advice. And so that's why I would say for everyone, please let your voice be heard in the appropriate way. Timely, share information with your elected officials, and really be solution focused, which is helpful. Everyone's angry at a lot of things right now that are closed, and I get it. And I too would like to see a lot of things open. But for those businesses, if you have a solution and a way that you think this could be done in a better way, or here's information I'd like to share with you, that's very helpful for your elected officials.
Yeah, thanks for that, Monica. And to your point, serving on the Economic Resilience Task Force, I can tell all that Supervisor Barger, as the chair of the county supervisors, and others, they really listen. And what was so impressive was we came from different sectors, and a lot of us from not just the business community, but also the higher education, nonprofit. And it was interesting what a unified voice we had, even though we came from different places and different walks of life. And I really do believe the county's listening and is continuing to pay attention, as is the health. The health department needs to, clearly, and our state officials, no doubt. So thanks for that input. And once again, for everything you and the county team is doing. We have time for one more question, perhaps, and maybe Scott, I think I'll come to you first on this, and Geoff, perhaps we can hear some perspective from you, and maybe Monica as well. But as we look ahead to 2021 and the years to come, I talked earlier about the decades to come. What do you see as the greatest challenge and the opportunity as we seek to rebuild a prosperous, inclusive economy? And where do you see your respective sector making the greatest impact? Scott, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that became very apparent in this pandemic is the inequalities of how the pandemic affected different communities in a very impactful way. And so, as Bank of America, we noticed this very quickly on in the whole pandemic, and have been trying to support that. And not too long ago, just a month or so ago, Bank of America announced a $1 billion multi-year commitment to address the economic equality in the communities of color. And really what that comes down to, as we break down some of what we're trying to do, it really has to do with getting them prepared for a new economy. Job training is one of the things, either reskilling or upskilling, providing money for that, so that there's, a better opportunity. As Geoff said, the economy will be different. There are jobs we don't even know about yet. Having everybody prepared for that. To support, the communities adversely affected by the health crisis. Mentioned that before with our commitment to Altamed, other health communities as well, is frontline workers are mostly people of color, and they have been the most affected. And when you look at the statistics of how those affected versus the population, it's very troubling how different it is for our underserved communities. The money will also go to direct investment in minority depository institutions to help them to take care of their own communities and what they're trying to do in supporting them. And then lastly, also we'll do some equity investments into private equity firms that are minority owned and or they're serving the minority owned businesses. And we really view that to have a healthy economy, it has to work for everybody. It can't just work for a limited few. So by making these investments to gain that equality, which will be a multi-year, long-term strategy that needs to take place as we get through the economy to be back to where it was before. We want it to look a lot different than it did previously, where it's resilient, it's sustainable, and it is inclusive of everybody contributing within the LA community and reaping the rewards of that strong economy.
Thank you, Scott. Geoff, any thoughts, challenges, opportunities?
Well, I couldn't agree more on the opportunity of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and certainly for the Marshall School, that agenda is incredibly important, not only on campus, but in terms of our relationships with the local community. I think urban universities have a special challenge and responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity to work with their local communities. But zooming out a little bit, a cliche I would normally use is there's real time and then there's university time. Universities are typically crusty, slow-moving institutions, lots of status quo bias. I just don't think that's going to be the case post-pandemic. I think it's likely that there'll be more innovation in higher education in the next few years than there's been in the past several decades. And I think a lot of that is going to focus on career outcomes for students and preparing students and lifelong learners for the world of work. I look forward to that very much. I think it'll make business schools even more central to all of higher education than they've been in the past.
Thanks, Geoff. And Monica, same question for you.
Yeah, thanks. And I totally agree with both Scott and Geoff on that. I think the challenges, to me, what we've seen are the technology challenges. We've heard about that with the digital divide, with who has access to technology. Part of that is an infrastructure issue, that we're using really old systems to get approvals, even to kind of repair and fix older technology like cell towers, et cetera. Even just to fix it, you're going through a whole new process. So you're adding years and years and years, and we're seeing with so many people either having school at home or working at home, the system is really taxed because it's intended and created in such a way to make it difficult to make it better. So that's something that we're working on right now at the county, and I'm really excited about it because I think it's going to have really long-term and positive dividends for the entire community. But the challenge on the flip end as well is to see where we are now and that we're not there with some of the technology pieces, and that's really challenging and problematic. We've heard that from students that don't have access, or they have one computer in the home, but there's 3 siblings, so, or maybe the parent needs that computer to be able to do their job and they didn't own that already, or their Wi-Fi is bad, or they don't have a hotspot. So now you're seeing the challenges on the education or work side. And we're also seeing that in terms of increased court cases, because the courts have all not been virtual for most of this time. And all these challenges, you have to think about the energy infrastructure that's needed to kind of carry the system on the back end. So I hope that our state and our region is really looking at heavy duty infrastructure investment, like in these things, to really move us to that next step. And when we're thinking about all these technology pieces and satellites and low Earth orbit satellites, et cetera, there's an infrastructure there that we need to focus and push on. So that's kind of the challenge and the opportunity in one.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. You hit a really important point, and I might just embellish a little bit. We've talked about higher education today, but also, education in general and that digital divide, as we're calling it now. I can speak firsthand, having two high school age sons who go to school in the city, and on occasion, their fellow students are found in their cars in the parking lot because they just don't have access to what some of us can take for granted. Good Wi-Fi. Mine's held up this morning, thankfully, even though I have two high school classes going on around me. But I think that's really important, and I'd add to that the importance of getting our kids back in school, not just for their own sake, which is really important, but also think of all the working families who, if their kids are home, especially the youngest of the kids, hard for mom and dad to go back to work. So I think we all need to be paying attention to that. And it's beyond local officials, because our state officials clearly need to embrace that concept and pay attention. I thought I'd add one comment, a bit of a closing comment, but to my own question of what are the challenges and opportunities. I talked earlier, I think LA is a region, and once again, you think about what those few business leaders did in 1888 with some resources, but nothing compared to what we have today. And I think about what we are able to do. And I really, truly believe, I did not grow up in Los Angeles, but I've been here almost my whole adult life. And there is no region that should thrive like Los Angeles, like Southern California, like the state of California. And one thing that I think is a challenge, but an opportunity at the same time, is we just, like in our own businesses, and no matter what that business is, there's a business to higher education, there's a business to health. We all operate in different sorts of businesses. And I think it's important to not take any of our constituents for granted, and to pay attention to the competition that is out there, because LA can thrive, can be the leader. There's no doubt in my mind, but we also need to do what we can to stay ahead of our competition, whatever competition, different cities, different regions. And once again, I think that's the opportunity to not just recover, not just to mitigate the damages of this pandemic, but let's think about how LA can be even stronger, even better, and compete and thrive more completely, better than ever, better than pre-pandemic. I hope that's our goal. So I want to thank Monica, Jeff, and Scott for the really valuable input for this great discussion today. And I want to thank once again the Chamber, and thank everybody for participating today, because these are really important discussions. I think this was one important discussion and to come today. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for joining us for the next chapter for LA's Regional Economy session. Next, you'll have the opportunity to join our first set of concurrent sessions. You can choose between either the future of LA's infrastructure, transportation, power, and sustainability, or healthcare and edtech in a health crisis, accelerating advancements and ensuring access. Please select your session choice under the Sessions tab at the top of your screen. We will see you back at 9:50 a.m.